With $200 in her checking account and $15,000 in medical debt crushing her dreams, Zara Williams drives through the city's most exclusive district, delivering food to people who spend more on dinner than she makes in a week, until one GPS error sends her to the wrong penthouse, where she discovers a bleeding Japanese crime boss who will either destroy her life or save it. At 24, Zara balanced 3 different delivery apps on her cracked phone screen while navigating the maze of downtown's luxury high-rises. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, sometimes Postmates when she was desperate enough to work their terrible rates. She was practical, focused, and knew exactly what every dollar meant. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun that stayed secure even during her longest shifts, and despite the exhaustion that lived permanently behind her dark eyes, she moved with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to waste time. She'd been a nursing student once, 2 years at community college with dreams of scrubs and stethoscopes, and a life spent helping people heal. But dreams didn't pay for cancer treatments. Dreams didn't cover the $2,000 monthly medication keeping her mother alive. The Honda Civic had seen better days, better years, and probably better decades, but it ran and the insurance was current, and it got her from delivery to delivery without breaking down. Tonight's run through the financial district meant good tips. Wealthy customers who ordered expensive sushi and premium steakhouse meals to penthouses that cost more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes. She preferred these routes despite the intimidation factor. Rich people tipped well when they bothered to tip at all, and she needed every dollar she could squeeze from the night shift. Her phone buzzed with the next pickup. Katsu Japanese, order for apartment 4B, total $48. Customer had tipped $15 on the app. Good money. She knew the building, had delivered there before. Upscale, but not impossible to access. Usually had a doorman who would call up or give her the elevator code. She grabbed the thermal bag from Katsu, checked the receipt, and headed across town. The building looked different at night. More imposing, more fortress than residence. Glass and steel reaching 30 floors into the dark sky, private balconies jutting out like expensive shelves displaying the wealth within. The doorman station was empty, unusual but not unheard of at nearly midnight. She checked her phone. Apartment 4B, customer name H. Yamamoto. The automatic doors opened as she approached, motion sensors recognizing her approach. The elevator bank stretched before her, all chrome and marble, soft lighting that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She punched in the code the customer had provided for building access, hoping it would work for the elevator too. The doors slid open silently. She pressed 4 for the 4th floor, checking her delivery app one more time to confirm the apartment number. For B, order for H. Yamamoto. Katsu dinner special with extra wasabi. The elevator climbed smoothly, no groaning or shuddering like the ones in her apartment complex. Everything here whispered money, power, the kind of wealth that insulated you from the world's sharp edges. The doors opened onto a hallway lined with expensive artwork, soft carpet that muffled her footsteps. She followed the numbers down the hall. For A, for B should be next. But 4B wasn't there. The hallway ended. No apartment, no door, just a dead end with a small placard reading emergency access only, authorized personnel, followed by a numeric keypad. She checked her phone again. The address was right. The building was right. But apartment 4B didn't exist. She stood there holding $48 worth of Japanese food, wondering if she'd somehow gotten the wrong floor, when she noticed the keypad was the same model as the one downstairs. The customer access code was still on her phone screen from when the customer had texted it to her for building entry. Maybe it was a penthouse situation where the apartment number was actually a private elevator access code. She was already here. The food was getting cold. The customer had paid and tipped. She typed in the code. The wall panel slid back silently, revealing a private elevator. Small, elegant, clearly meant for one specific destination. She hesitated, finger hovering over the single button marked P. This was either very right or very wrong, but she'd committed this far. She pressed the button. The elevator rose smoothly. Past floors she could see through the glass panels. Offices, conference rooms, what looked like a medical facility, before finally stopping at what had to be the building's crown. The doors opened onto an entrance hall that belonged in a palace, not an apartment. Black marble floors reflected soft lighting from fixtures that were probably worth more than her car. The air smelled expensive, leather and sandalwood, and something clean and sharp that spoke of money and power. She followed the hallway, thermal bag in hand, looking for some indication of where to leave the delivery. Her footsteps echoed despite the thick carpet, the sound swallowed by space designed to impress and intimidate. She passed floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city spread out 30 floors below, lights twinkling like fallen stars. The hallway opened into a massive living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. Furniture that looked like museum pieces. Art that was definitely museum quality. And blood. Dark stains on the marble, droplets leading toward what looked like a home office. She should have left. Should have set the bag down and walked away and pretended she'd never seen anything. But her nursing training was stronger than her common sense, and blood meant someone was hurt, and she couldn't walk away from someone who needed help even if common sense screamed that this was a very bad place to be at a very bad time. She followed the trail of blood to the office doorway and looked inside. He was slumped against a massive desk, one hand pressed against his side where dark blood seeped through his fingers. Even bleeding and pale, he was unmistakably commanding. Japanese, late 30s. With sharp features that belonged on magazine covers, and dark hair slightly disheveled from whatever had happened to him. His suit was expensive, custom-tailored, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, but it was torn and stained with blood around a wound that was clearly serious. His eyes opened as she appeared in the doorway. Dark, intelligent, calculating even through obvious pain. They studied her for a long moment, taking in her delivery uniform, the thermal bag in her hands, her obvious shock at the scene. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice surprisingly steady for someone losing blood at what looked like a dangerous rate. "Neither are you," she replied automatically, then realized how stupid that sounded. This was clearly his place. "I'm sorry, I had a delivery for 4B. The GPS must have, the elevator code worked, so I thought." He was still watching her, and despite the blood loss and obvious pain, there was something in his eyes that made her intensely aware that this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his current injury. This was not someone who ended up bleeding in his own office by accident. This was not someone whose world intersected with hers under normal circumstances. "You should go," he said, but there was no force behind it. More like a suggestion offered by someone who knew it wouldn't be taken. She looked at the wound, at the way he was holding himself, at the pallor of his skin. Her nursing training cataloged the signs automatically. Significant blood loss. Possible internal bleeding. Shock setting in. Without treatment, he'd be unconscious in minutes and dead within the hour. "You're bleeding out," she said. "Where's your phone? Have you called for help?" He gestured weakly toward a phone on the desk, shattered, probably from whatever confrontation had led to this. His breathing was becoming shallower, his grip on the wound loosening. She set down the thermal bag and moved toward him, her hands already reaching for the first aid supplies she kept in her delivery bag. It wasn't much, basic bandages and antiseptic, but it was something. "You need pressure on this wound. Can you keep your hand there while I—" "Who are you?" he asked, but his voice was getting weaker. "Zara. I deliver food. I used to be in nursing school." She was already tearing open gauze packages, moving on instinct and training. "This is going to hurt, but I need to see how deep it goes." She peeled back his hand and immediately saw the problem. Deep laceration, probably from a blade, bleeding heavily, but not arterial. Painful and dangerous, but treatable if she could get the bleeding controlled. She pressed fresh gauze against the wound, applying firm pressure. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. His eyes stayed on her face, studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. "Why haven't you run?" he asked. "Because you're bleeding and I know how to help," she said simply. "Can you call someone? A doctor? Hospital?" "No hospitals," he said quickly. "Too many questions." She understood immediately. Whatever had happened here, whatever world this man lived in, it existed outside normal channels. Outside places where people asked for insurance cards and called police and wanted explanations for knife wounds. "Do you have gauze? Proper medical supplies?" she asked. "Downstairs. Medical facility. But I can't." She looked at him, at the spreading stain on his expensive suit, at the way his breathing was getting more labored. He wasn't going to make it downstairs without help. But if she left him to find supplies, He might not be conscious when she got back. Stay awake, she said firmly. Keep pressure on this. I'm going to find what I need and come back. You don't have to, he said. But there was something in his voice, surprise maybe, or gratitude, like kindness was not something he encountered often in his world. Yes, I do, she said, and meant it. She found the medical facility 2 floors down, accessed through another keypad, and it was better equipped than some emergency rooms she'd seen. She grabbed what she needed, proper gauze and medical tape and antiseptic, and took the private elevator back to the penthouse. He was still conscious when she returned, still pressing the makeshift bandage against his side, but his color was worse and his breathing shallower. She knelt beside him, working quickly to clean and dress the wound properly. Her hands were steady, movements efficient, the nervous energy of the night focused into the familiar rhythms of medical care. You're good at this, he observed as she worked. I was almost a nurse, she said, before I had to drop out. Why did you have to drop out? Money. My mother got sick. Cancer. The treatments were more important than my tuition. He was quiet for a moment, watching her secure the bandage. The bleeding had slowed significantly, and his color was starting to improve. What's your name? He asked. Zara Williams. I'm Hiroshi Yamamoto. She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time since she'd started treating his wound. Even injured and vulnerable, there was something about him that spoke of power, control, danger carefully leashed. This was not a man who found himself helpless often. This was not a man whose world operated by the same rules as hers. Mr. Yamamoto, she said formally, because something about him demanded that kind of respect. You need to see a real doctor. This is stabilized, but you could have internal injuries I can't assess. I have a doctor, he said. But thank you. You saved my life tonight. She sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of where she was, what she'd done, how far outside her normal world she'd wandered. She was sitting in a stranger's penthouse, having treated what was clearly a criminal's wounds, and she had no idea what came next. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. Yes, he said quietly. You should, but I'm very glad you didn't. The immediate crisis wasn't over. Hiroshi Yamamoto's breathing remained shallow, his pulse rapid and thready against her fingertips when she checked his wrist. The bandage had slowed the bleeding but hadn't stopped it entirely, and she could see the telltale signs of shock setting in. His skin was pale, slightly clammy, and his responses were getting slower. Without proper medical intervention, the temporary stabilization wouldn't hold. You need to lie down, she said, moving to help him shift position. Flat on your back, legs elevated. It'll help with blood flow. He allowed her to guide him down onto the marble floor, which wasn't ideal but was better than slumped against the desk where gravity was working against him. She grabbed throw pillows from the nearby seating area, expensive silk that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and propped his legs up. The position would help ensure blood flow to vital organs while his body worked to replace what he'd lost. Better, she said, checking his pulse again. It was stronger, more regular. The color was starting to return to his face. Where did you learn this? Hiroshi Yamamoto asked, his voice steadier now that he was positioned properly. Community college nursing program. 2 years before I had to stop. Plus I volunteer at the free clinic when I can. You see a lot of trauma there. He was studying her again with those dark, calculating eyes. Even in his current state, there was something about his attention that felt intense, like he was cataloging information about her that went far beyond her medical capabilities. You could have left, he said. Called police. Ambulance. Let me deal with the consequences. Could have, she agreed, adjusting the pressure on his bandage. Didn't want to. Why? Because you were bleeding and I know how to help. It's not complicated. But it was complicated, and they both knew it. This wasn't a car accident or a kitchen mishap. The expensive suit, the isolated penthouse, the reluctance to involve hospitals or authorities, all pointed to a world that operated outside normal boundaries. She wasn't naive enough to miss the implications. Her phone buzzed. Another delivery request. The normal world calling her back to thermal bags and GPS coordinates and customers who tipped $3 on $40 orders. She declined the request, keeping her hands free to monitor Hiroshi Yamamoto's condition. You're missing work because of me, he observed. It'll be fine. I can afford to miss one delivery. It was a lie and they both knew it. She couldn't afford to miss anything. Couldn't afford the time away from the apps that kept money trickling into her account. But leaving him before help arrived wasn't an option her conscience would allow. 20 minutes later, she heard the private elevator ascending. Hiroshi Yamamoto's eyes opened, alert despite his condition. "That's my doctor," he said. The man who emerged from the elevator looked like he belonged in an expensive medical practice, not making house calls to bleeding crime bosses. Silver-haired, expensive clothing, carrying a medical bag that probably cost more than her car. He took in the scene quickly, professional assessment calculating blood loss and treatment priorities. "What happened?" he asked Hiroshi Yamamoto, but his hands were already examining the wound, checking her bandaging work. "Business disagreement that got personal," Hiroshi replied. "She found me, provided first aid. Probably saved my life." The doctor looked at her properly for the first time, taking in her delivery uniform, her competent positioning of his patient, the quality of her emergency treatment. "You have medical training," he said. It wasn't a question. "Some," she replied. "Nursing school before I had to drop out." "Good work. The pressure bandaging is textbook, elevation was smart. He needs fluids and probably stitches, but you stabilized him well enough to matter." Hiroshi Yamamoto was watching this exchange with interest. His color had improved significantly, breathing more regular, alertness returning as his body compensated for the blood loss. "Dr. Tanaka," he said, his voice carrying authority despite his horizontal position. "I'd like you to examine Ms. Williams as well. Make sure she wasn't injured helping me." "I'm fine," Zara protested. "Really, I wasn't hurt." "Humor me," Hiroshi said, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Dr. Tanaka checked her hands, which had some blood on them, but no cuts, her arms, her general condition. Clean bill of health, minor adrenaline spike, but nothing concerning. "She's fine." "Good," Hiroshi said. "Now if you could give us a few minutes for a private conversation." The doctor packed his supplies efficiently. "I'll set up the 4 in the bedroom, monitor vitals for the next few hours. No strenuous activity for at least a week, preferably 2. The wound needs to stay clean and dry." After he left, the penthouse felt different. Quieter, more intimate despite its massive size. Hiroshi Yamamoto remained on the floor, but his presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with his physical position. "You saved my life tonight," he said simply. "I did what anyone would do." "No," he said, and his certainty was absolute. "Most people would have run. Called authorities. Protected themselves first. You chose to help a stranger who was clearly dangerous." The word dangerous hung between them, an acknowledgement of what they'd both been avoiding saying directly. "I want to compensate you," he continued, "for your time tonight. Your skill. The risk you took. You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do." He shifted slightly, preparing to sit up. "Don't," she said quickly. "Stay down until Dr. Tanaka says otherwise." He smiled, a brief expression that transformed his sharp features entirely. "You're giving me orders in my own home. Medical orders. Different thing. Is it?" He was studying her again, that intense focus that made her feel like he was seeing things about her she didn't even know herself. "Look, Mr. Yamamoto," she said, using his full name because something about the formality felt safer. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't take money from you. I don't know what kind of business you're in, but it's clearly not the kind where people end up bleeding from knife wounds by accident." "Very perceptive," he said. "So thank you, but I'll just go back to my deliveries, and we can pretend this never happened." "Can we?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that made her stomach tighten with nervousness. "Can't we? You've seen my home. My vulnerability. You know I exist, where I live, what I look like when I'm not in control. There are people in my world who would pay substantial money for that information." "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm explaining reality. The world I exist in doesn't allow for chance encounters and forgotten meetings. People who know things about me become either assets or liabilities." The weight of his words settled over her like cold water. She'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a wrong delivery, and there was no clean way to stumble back out. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Hiroshi Yamamoto said, his voice gentle despite the harsh truth he was delivering, "that your life just became significantly more complicated, and mine just became responsible for your safety." She stared at him, understanding beginning to crystallize into something that felt like fear. Not fear of him, exactly, but fear of the situation, The implications, the way her normal world had suddenly tilted into something unrecognizable. "I just wanted to help," she said. "I know," he replied. "And that's exactly why this matters." Dr. Tanaka appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Yamamoto, I need to get you properly treated and monitored." "Ms. Williams, you're welcome to wait if you'd like, but this will take some time." Zara looked between them. The expensive doctor with his discretion and professional competence, the injured man whose eyes held promises and threats in equal measure. She should leave. Walk away from whatever this was becoming. Go back to her deliveries and her ordinary problems and her predictable world. But she'd seen him bleeding, vulnerable, human underneath all that controlled power. And he'd seen her choose to help when helping was dangerous. Something had shifted between them in those moments. Something that made walking away feel like abandoning more than just a stranger. "I'll wait," she said, surprising herself. Hiroshi Yamamoto's smile was small but genuine. "Good," he said. "We have things to discuss." The medical facility 2 floors below the penthouse was more sophisticated than most hospitals Zara had seen. Clean white walls, state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, a fully stocked pharmacy behind glass doors, examination tables that probably cost more than her annual income. Dr. Tanaka worked with the efficiency of someone accustomed to treating injuries that couldn't be explained to traditional medical authorities. Hiroshi Yamamoto lay on the examination table, his expensive suit replaced with medical scrubs that somehow still looked elegant on him. The wound had required 12 stitches, and Dr. Tanaka had administered 4 fluids to counter the blood loss. Color had returned to his face, and his breathing was steady and strong. "Vitals are stable," Dr. Tanaka reported, checking the monitors one final time. "Blood pressure normalizing, pulse regular." The laceration missed anything vital, but it was deep enough to cause significant bleeding. With proper rest and care, full recovery in 2 weeks. "Thank you, Doctor," Hiroshi said. "Will you be available if I need follow-up care?" "Of course. Call if there's any sign of infection, excessive bleeding, or if the pain becomes unmanageable. Otherwise, I'll check on you tomorrow evening." After Dr. Tanaka left, Hiroshi Yamamoto turned his attention to Zara, who had been sitting quietly in a corner chair, watching the medical procedures with professional interest and growing awareness of the resources at this man's disposal. "Impressive facility," she said. "Necessary," he replied. "Men in my line of work sometimes require medical attention that can't involve traditional channels." "What line of work is that, exactly?" He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "Import-export business. Shipping. International trade. Some of my business partners are more traditional in their negotiation methods than others." It was a careful answer that told her everything and nothing. She understood the euphemisms, the diplomatic language that described a world where business disagreements were settled with knives and guns rather than lawyers and contracts. "The people who did this to you tonight," she said. "Will they try again?" "Possibly. That's why I need to know something about you, Ms. Williams. About your character, your discretion, your ability to keep confidences. What do you need to know? Tonight you saw me vulnerable. You saw where I live, how I live, the fact that I have enemies who would kill me if they could. You could sell that information. To rivals, to law enforcement, to journalists. You could destroy me with what you know. But I won't. How do I know that? Because I'm telling you I won't. Because I don't work that way." He shifted on the examination table, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his stitches. Many people would say the same thing. Most would mean it when they said it. But circumstances change. Money gets tight. People get desperate. "Are you testing me?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." He reached for a tablet on the nearby medical cart, typed something quickly, then showed her the screen. It was a bank account interface showing a balance of $37,000. "This account belongs to Marcus Rodriguez," he said. "He's been stealing from me for 3 months. Small amounts, thinking I wouldn't notice. Last week I offered him a choice. Return what he stole and work to make up the difference, or face the consequences of theft from people like me. What did he choose? He chose to run. But before he left town, he went to my competitors and sold information about my legitimate business operations. Shipping schedules, security protocols, client lists. Information that nearly got me killed tonight." She stared at the tablet, understanding the weight of what he was telling her. This wasn't theoretical. This was what happened to people who betrayed his trust. So the test is whether I run to your enemies with information about tonight. Partly. But mostly the test is whether you can live with moral complexity. Whether you can accept help from someone whose hands are not entirely clean. Whether you can be part of a world where protection and danger exist side by side. She looked around the medical facility, at the expensive equipment and professional setup, at the man who commanded this level of resources and loyalty. Dr. Tanaka hadn't asked questions about the knife wound. The building's security had allowed her access without verification. This was a man whose word carried weight, whose needs were met without explanation or justification. "What are you offering me?" she asked. "A job. A very well-compensated position as my personal medical consultant." He gestured to a chair beside the examination table, indicating she should sit closer. What followed was the most surreal job interview of her life. The position would involve providing medical care for me and my associates when needed, Hiroshi Yamamoto said, his tone formal and businesslike despite the circumstances. Injuries that require immediate attention but cannot involve traditional medical facilities. Nothing beyond your training, nothing that would put you at risk of practicing outside your scope. What kind of injuries? The kind that happen in my world. Cuts, bruises, broken bones, occasional gunshot wounds that miss vital organs. Dr. Tanaka handles the serious cases, but there are times when immediate first aid makes the difference between life and death. Like tonight. And the compensation. $150,000 annually. Full health insurance for you and your mother, including coverage for her cancer treatments with the best oncologists in the country. Completion of your nursing degree, tuition and expenses paid in full. Separate apartment for your mother in a secure building with 24-hour medical staff available. The numbers hit her like physical blows. $150,000 was more than she made in 3 years of delivery driving. Full health coverage meant her mother could have the treatments she needed without drowning in medical debt. Nursing school meant she could finish what she started, become what she'd always wanted to be. "What would you expect in exchange?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Absolute loyalty. Complete discretion about anything you see or hear in my world. Immediate availability when medical situations arise. You would live on my property for security purposes, in a private apartment with full amenities." Security purposes. The people who attacked me tonight know someone helped me survive. They'll be looking for that person. If you remain in your current apartment, working your delivery routes, living your normal life, you become a target. And targets in my world don't usually survive long enough to regret their involvement. The weight of that statement settled over her like cold water. She'd saved his life, and in doing so, had made her own life forfeit to the normal world. There was no going back to thermal bags and GPS coordinates and customers who tipped poorly. That world had ended the moment she chose to help a bleeding stranger. How long would this arrangement last? As long as you wish it to. I don't believe in forcing loyalty through desperation. The position would be genuine employment, with the understanding that you could leave if you chose to. Though leaving would require certain security protocols. What kind of protocols? Relocation assistance. New identity, if necessary. Complete disconnection from my world and everyone in it. I protect what's mine, Ms. Williams, even when what's mine chooses to leave. She stared at him, understanding that he was offering her a cage made of gold and security and protection. A beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Once she stepped into his world, stepping back out would mean disappearing from her own life entirely. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, but not for long. My enemies are efficient, and your window for maintaining your current life is closing rapidly. How long do I have? Until tomorrow evening. After that, the choice may be made for you by circumstances beyond either of our control." She sat back in the chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering and what it would cost. $150,000. Her mother's life saved. Her own dreams restored. Security beyond anything she'd ever imagined. All in exchange for loyalty to a man whose world operated outside the law, whose protection came at the price of freedom. Her mind raced through the implications, the possibilities, the stark reality of her current situation. Her mother's cancer treatments cost $2,000 monthly, money she didn't have and couldn't borrow. Her own dreams of nursing school had died under the weight of medical debt and immediate survival needs. She worked 70 hours a week for barely enough money to keep them both alive, with no hope of improvement, no path forward that didn't involve grinding poverty and watching her mother deteriorate without proper medical care. Against that reality, Hiroshi Yamamoto's offer looked like salvation. Dangerous, complicated, morally ambiguous salvation, but salvation nonetheless. Her mother would live, would thrive under the best medical care money could buy. She herself would finish nursing school, become what she'd always wanted to be, use her skills to help people heal. The price was loyalty to a man whose business involved violence, discretion about activities that would horrify her former self, acceptance of protection that came with invisible chains. But were those chains worse than the ones that already bound her? The chains of poverty, medical debt, hopelessness, watching dreams die while fighting for basic survival. At least his chains came with dignity, purpose, the ability to help the people she cared about most. She looked at Hiroshi Yamamoto, this dangerous man whose life she'd saved, whose world she'd glimpsed, whose resources could transform everything. He was watching her with patient attention, understanding that she was wrestling with more than just a job offer. This was a choice about what kind of life she wanted to live, what prices she was willing to pay for security and opportunity. The moral part of her mind screamed warnings about blood money, criminal associations, the corruption of accepting help from someone whose hands were stained with violence. But the practical part, the part that balanced checkbooks and counted pills and measured hope against reality, recognized that morality was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mother was dying by degrees without proper treatment. Her own dreams were dead without resources to resurrect them. This man was offering both, and the price he asked was discretion and loyalty to someone who had shown her nothing but respect and consideration. Maybe it wasn't about choosing between right and wrong. Maybe it was about choosing between different kinds of wrong, different prices for the same desperate needs. She could maintain her moral purity and watch her mother die slowly while her own potential withered into permanent regret. Or she could accept help from someone whose methods she couldn't approve, but whose results she couldn't deny. She thought about the medical facility around them, the quality of care Dr. Tanaka provided, the efficiency and professionalism of Hiroshi's organization. This wasn't random violence or casual criminality. This was structure, purpose, people taking care of each other outside the boundaries of traditional systems. Maybe there was space for healing in that world, space for someone whose primary goal was helping people survive and thrive. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to. Hiroshi Yamamoto studied her face for a long moment, as if confirming the resolve behind her words. "You understand what you're agreeing to. The risks, the requirements, the fact that your old life ends tonight. I understand. And you're certain this is what you want. It's what I need. For my mother, for myself, for any chance at the future I wanted." "Yes, I'm certain." He nodded slowly, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Then welcome to my world, Ms. Williams. I think you'll find it quite different from what you expect." As if summoned by some invisible signal, Dr. Tanaka reappeared in the doorway. "Mr. Yamamoto, I've prepared discharge instructions and medication protocols. You should be able to return to normal activities within a week, full activities within 2. "Thank you, Doctor." "Dr. Tanaka, I'd like you to meet my new medical consultant, Ms. Zara Williams. She'll be working closely with us going forward." Dr. Tanaka smiled warmly, extending his hand to her. "Welcome to the team, Ms. Williams. I look forward to working with someone who clearly knows what they're doing under pressure." After Dr. Tanaka left, Hiroshi Yamamoto turned back to her with renewed energy despite his recent injury. "There are practical matters to address immediately. Your safety, your mother's relocation, your belongings, establishing your new identity within my organization." "My new identity. Nothing dramatic. You'll still be Zara Williams, but Zara Williams who works for Yamamoto Industries in a medical consulting capacity. Legitimate business, legitimate payroll, legitimate benefits. My legal teams are excellent at creating paperwork that satisfies any investigation. And my mother will be moved to a secure medical facility tomorrow morning. The best oncology center on the West Coast, with private rooms and round-the-clock nursing care. She'll receive treatments that aren't available through traditional insurance plans." She felt tears threatening and fought them back. This was too much, Too fast, too generous for someone who'd simply done what felt right in an emergency. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because you saved my life. Because you chose to help when helping was dangerous. Because you passed my test by accepting my offer rather than trying to negotiate for more or demanding additional guarantees. Because I believe you'll be valuable to my organization beyond just your medical skills." "What other skills?" "You think clearly under pressure. You make decisions based on principle rather than fear. You see people as human beings rather than threats or opportunities. Those qualities are rare in my world, and they're valuable in ways you might not expect." She understood that she was being recruited for more than medical emergencies. That Hiroshi Yamamoto saw potential in her that went beyond first aid and wound care. The thought was both flattering and terrifying. "When do we start?" she asked. "Tonight," he said. "My security team will escort you to your apartment to pack essential items, then bring you to your new residence. Everything else can be arranged tomorrow." As they prepared to leave the medical facility, Zara felt the weight of transformation settling around her. In the space of a few hours, her life had changed completely. The struggling delivery driver was gone, replaced by someone with resources, purpose, protection. Someone whose future was no longer measured in daily survival, but in possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. The price for that transformation was loyalty to a dangerous man and discretion about a violent world. But looking at Hiroshi Yamamoto, seeing the intelligence and consideration behind his carefully controlled exterior, she thought perhaps the price was not as steep as it appeared. Perhaps there were worse things than being protected by someone who valued loyalty and competence over fear and submission. Perhaps there were worse fates than being saved. 2 months after that first night in the penthouse, Zara Williams had settled into a routine that would have been unimaginable in her previous life. Her apartment within Hiroshi Yamamoto's compound was larger than anywhere she'd ever lived, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking private gardens and a view of the city that reminded her daily how far her world had expanded. The apartment came fully furnished with elegant, comfortable pieces that managed to feel like home despite their obvious expense. Her days had structure now, purpose that went beyond simple survival. 3 mornings a week, she attended nursing classes at the university, her tuition paid in full, her schedule accommodated around her responsibilities to Hiroshi's organization. The other days, she worked in the medical facility, treating everything from minor cuts during training sessions to more serious injuries that resulted from business negotiations that had gone poorly for the other parties involved. She'd learned to treat gunshot wounds that missed vital organs, knife cuts from territorial disputes, broken bones from men who'd been sent messages about overdue debts. Her patients were polite, respectful, grateful for care that came without questions or police reports. They called her Ms. Williams with genuine deference, understanding that her position in Hiroshi's organization commanded respect regardless of her medical credentials. Hiroshi Yamamoto himself had been a model patient during his recovery, following Dr. Tanaka's instructions precisely, allowing proper healing time before resuming his normal activities. But Zara had noticed things about him during those weeks that had nothing to do with his wound care. The way he remembered details about her mother's treatment progress, asking specific questions about her response to chemotherapy, and ensuring adjustments were made immediately when side effects became problematic. The way he'd quietly arranged for her nursing school professors to have access to medical journals and resources that weren't typically available to students, enhancing her education without making it obvious he was involved. Her mother's transformation had been the most dramatic change. Maria Williams had moved from the free clinic's basic cancer care to the city's most exclusive oncology center, where Dr. Patricia Chun was pioneering treatments that weren't available anywhere else. The difference was visible within weeks. Color returning to her mother's face, energy returning to her voice, hope returning to her eyes as the experimental treatments proved more effective than anything she'd received before. "I don't understand how this is possible," her mother had said during one of Zara's visits. "This treatment, this facility, the private nurses. How are we affording this?" "I got a new job," Zara had explained. "Medical consulting for a private company. Very good benefits." It was true, as far as it went. Yamamoto Industries was a legitimate business entity with shipping contracts, real estate holdings, and import licensing that generated substantial legal revenue. The fact that it also served as a front for less conventional activities was information her mother didn't need to possess. The first time she'd treated one of Hiroshi's associates for a serious injury, she'd been nervous about her ability to handle trauma care outside a traditional medical setting. Kenji Nakamura had arrived at the medical facility with a deep cut across his forearm, bleeding heavily but not immediately life-threatening. He was younger than Hiroshi, maybe 30, with the same controlled intensity but less refined edges. Business meeting got complicated, he'd explained as she cleaned and sutured the wound. The other party had different ideas about contract terms. She'd worked efficiently, her nursing training taking over despite the unusual circumstances. The cut required 18 stitches, and she'd been proud of her neat, precise work. Kenji had been an excellent patient, sitting still despite obvious pain, following her instructions without question. "You're very good at this," he'd said as she finished bandaging the wound. "Hiroshi told us you saved his life." "I did what anyone would do." "No," Kenji had said seriously. "You did what the right person would do. There's a difference." Over time, she'd learned the subtle hierarchies within Hiroshi's organization, the relationships and responsibilities that connected the men who came to her for medical care. Kenji was his second in command, handling day-to-day operations and serving as liaison with their legitimate business partners. Dr. Tanaka was more than just a physician. He was an advisor whose counsel extended far beyond medical matters. The security team that rotated through the compound treated her with the same respect they showed Hiroshi himself, understanding that her safety was directly connected to his well-being. But it was the quiet moments with Hiroshi that had surprised her most. Evenings when her official duties were finished and she'd find him in his study, working through financial reports or international shipping manifests. He'd invite her to sit, offer wine or tea, ask about her day, her classes, her mother's progress. Their conversations had evolved from polite employer-employee exchanges to something more personal, more genuine. She'd begun to see glimpses of the man beneath the controlled exterior, his dry sense of humor when recounting particularly absurd business negotiations, his genuine concern when one of his men was injured, ensuring families were cared for during recovery periods. His unexpected knowledge of art, literature, classical music, subjects that seemed incongruous with his dangerous reputation but revealed depth she hadn't expected. One evening in late autumn, she'd found him in the Penthouse's library, a room she'd never seen during that first crisis-filled night. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in Japanese, English, and what looked like Chinese. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, something orchestral and melancholy that seemed to match his mood. "Bad day?" she asked, settling into a chair across from his desk. "Complicated day," he corrected, "though I suppose they're often the same thing." He was looking at a photograph on his desk, something she'd never noticed before. A young woman, maybe 20, with dark hair and a bright smile, standing in front of what looked like a university campus. "Your sister," she said, understanding intuitively. He looked up, surprised by her perceptiveness. "Yes, Yuki. She would have been 26 this year." "Would have been." He set the photograph down carefully, his movements precise despite the obvious emotion behind them. "She was killed 3 years ago. Murdered by people who wanted to hurt me, but couldn't reach me directly." Zara felt her stomach tighten with sympathetic pain. "I'm sorry. She was everything good about our family," Hiroshi continued, his voice quiet but steady. "Kind, brilliant, dedicated to helping others. She was studying to become a pediatric surgeon, wanted to work with children who couldn't afford proper medical care." The description painted a picture of someone who would have liked Zara, someone whose values aligned with her own desire to use medical skills for helping rather than harming. "What happened?" she asked gently. Traditional Yakuza organizations operate according to old codes, old ways of doing business. Honor through violence, loyalty through fear, profit through intimidation and territory control. When I began building legitimate businesses, diversifying our income streams, creating legal revenue that didn't depend on illegal activities, some of my elders viewed it as betrayal of tradition. He stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city lights spread below them. They wanted me to abandon the legitimate businesses, return to traditional methods. I refused. So they decided to teach me a lesson about the price of dishonoring family traditions. They killed your sister. They made it look like a random crime. Robbery gone wrong. But they left enough evidence for me to understand it was personal, purposeful. A message about what happened to family members of men who betrayed the old ways. Zara felt tears threatening as she imagined the pain of losing someone precious to violence intended as punishment for choices that were actually progress, growth, moving away from the very brutality that had destroyed his sister. I was in Seoul when it happened, Hiroshi continued, negotiating shipping contracts that would have provided employment for dozens of our people in legitimate work. I'd been so focused on building something better, something clean, that I forgot the enemies that kind of change creates. I left her unprotected while I chased idealistic dreams about reforming our organization. That's why you couldn't go to hospitals that night, she said, understanding more than just the practical concerns about police involvement. You don't trust traditional systems to protect the people you care about. Traditional systems failed her completely. Police investigated for 3 weeks, found nothing useful, closed the case as unsolved. The people who killed her faced no consequences, learned they could hurt me through people I loved, and I learned I had to change how I thought about protection and family. He turned from the window, his dark eyes holding pain that was still raw despite 3 years of healing. When I found you in my penthouse that night, bleeding and in need of help I couldn't provide for myself, I saw an opportunity to do things differently, to protect someone who deserved protection, to build loyalty through care rather than fear. Is that what this is? She asked. Me being here, working for you. Is this about your sister? Partly, but only partly. He moved closer, his presence warming the space between them. Yuki would have liked you. She believed in using skill and knowledge to help people heal, regardless of who they were or where they came from. You embody everything she worked toward. You can't save her by saving me. I know that. But I can honor her memory by ensuring that good people who help others are protected from the kind of violence that destroyed her. I can make certain that kindness isn't punished in my world. Zara felt something shifting inside her chest, an emotion deeper than gratitude, stronger than professional respect. She was seeing him not as the powerful, dangerous man who'd offered her security in exchange for loyalty, but as someone who'd lost the person he loved most and was trying to create meaning from that loss. She's why you care so much about protecting people. She's why I understand that protection isn't about control. It's about creating space for good people to do good things without fear of destruction. You proved that night in the penthouse that you're one of the good people, Zara. Everything I've done since then has been about making sure you can continue being good without paying the price she paid. The vulnerability in his admission was staggering. This wasn't the controlled crime boss offering protection in exchange for services. This was a man who'd been broken by loss and was slowly rebuilding himself around the purpose of preventing similar losses for others. Thank you for telling me, she said, about Yuki, about why this matters to you. Thank you for listening, and for understanding that my world isn't entirely dark, even when it appears that way from the outside. Their conversation was interrupted by Kenji appearing in the library doorway, his expression serious in a way that immediately shifted the atmosphere from intimate to alert. We have a problem, Kenji said. The surveillance team picked up unusual activity around the medical center. 3 different vehicles, rotating positions, watching the entrances. Watching for what? Hiroshi asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. Ms. Williams. They've identified her as important to you, and they're planning something. The warmth of their shared moment evaporated as reality reasserted itself. Zara felt ice forming in her stomach as she understood that her connection to Hiroshi had made her a target, just as his connection to Yuki had made her vulnerable. What kind of planning? Hiroshi asked, his voice taking on the cold edge she'd heard that first night when he was injured and dangerous. The kind that ends with leverage, Kenji replied. The Sasaki clan wants you to abandon the legitimate businesses and return to traditional operations. They think taking someone important to you will provide sufficient motivation. Hiroshi was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried promises that made Zara understand why people feared him. How wrong they are about my motivation, he said quietly. Begin immediate protection protocols. Full security detail for Ms. Williams, her mother, and the medical facility. And start gathering information on Sasaki clan operations. All of them. Kenji nodded and left to implement orders that would undoubtedly involve methods Zara preferred not to think about in detail. Hiroshi turned back to her, his expression gentle despite the dangerous circumstances they were discussing. I'm sorry, Zara. I hoped we'd have more time before this became personal. Will they really try to kidnap me? They'll try, but they won't succeed. I learned from my failure with Yuki. I won't make the same mistakes twice. What does that mean for me? For my mother? It means your life becomes more restricted for a while. Security escorts, limited movement, no more visits to your mother's medical center until we resolve this situation. She felt the cage tightening around her, the golden bars of protection becoming more visible as external threats materialized. But she also felt the weight of Hiroshi's determination, his absolute commitment to ensuring she didn't suffer his sister's fate. How long will this take to resolve? She asked. Not long, he said, and something in his tone suggested the resolution would be permanent and decisive. 3 days later, as she left her advanced pharmacology class at the university, Zara noticed the black sedan that had been following her security escort. It stayed 3 cars back, changing lanes when they changed lanes, maintaining perfect distance for surveillance without appearing obvious. She activated the emergency communication device Hiroshi had insisted she carry, speaking quietly into what looked like a normal fitness tracker. This is Zara. I think we have company. The response came immediately through the nearly invisible earpiece that connected her to her security team. We see them. Stay calm. Proceed to your vehicle normally. Additional support is en route. But as she reached the parking structure where her armored car and driver waited, 3 more vehicles appeared, boxing in her security team's route and cutting off escape paths. Men emerged from the vehicles, moving with purpose and coordination that spoke of professional planning. Her driver reacted immediately, reversing toward an alternate exit while speaking rapidly into his radio. But the attackers had anticipated multiple scenarios, and the alternate route was blocked as well. Get down, her driver shouted, as the first gunshots shattered the parking structure's quiet. Zara dropped below window level, her heart hammering as she heard her security team returning fire, coordinating through radio chatter that was too fast and technical for her to follow. The armored car provided protection, but she understood they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Then she heard vehicles approaching at high speed, tires squealing on concrete, and additional gunfire that was clearly coming from a different direction. Hiroshi's voice came through her earpiece, calm despite the chaos. Stay down, Zara. We're handling this. The firefight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When silence finally returned to the parking structure, Kenji appeared at her window, gesturing for her to stay low as he checked the area. All clear, he reported. Targets neutralized. Ms. Williams is secure. Hiroshi appeared moments later, moving directly to her door, his expression furious in a way she'd never seen. When he helped her from the car, his hands were gentle, but his eyes promised violence for anyone who had threatened her. Are you hurt? He asked, checking her for injuries with the same careful attention he might give a gunshot wound. I'm fine. Scared, but fine. Good. This won't happen again. The cleanup was efficient and thorough. The attackers' vehicles were removed, evidence was collected, and within an hour, the parking structure looked normal except for some damage to concrete walls that could be attributed to construction accidents. As they drove back to the compound, Hiroshi's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. I'm sorry you had to experience that, he said. But it was necessary for them to understand what happens when they threaten what belongs to me. Belongs to you? Yes, he said simply. You belong to me, Zara. Not as property, but as someone under my protection, someone whose safety is more important to me than my own. And anyone who threatens you will learn exactly what that protection means. The possessive declaration should have frightened her, should have reminded her of the cage she'd accepted in exchange for security. But sitting beside him, seeing the genuine fear in his eyes at the thought of losing her, feeling the strength of his commitment to her safety, it felt less like imprisonment and more like being claimed by someone who understood her value. You saved my life that first night, she said. Now you've saved it again. And I'll keep saving it, he replied, as many times as necessary, for as long as you'll let me. In that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence that had been directed at her because of her connection to him, Zara realized her feelings had evolved far beyond gratitude or professional respect. She was falling in love with this dangerous, broken man who saw protecting her as the most important work of his life. The attack on the compound came at dawn, coordinated and brutal in a way that spoke of desperation rather than strategy. Hiroshi Yamamoto had spent the 3 days since the parking garage incident systematically dismantling Sasaki clan operations, freezing their assets, redirecting their shipping contracts, and making it clear that threatening what belonged to him carried consequences they hadn't anticipated. The Sasaki response was predictable in its violence and foolish in its scope. Zara woke to the sound of automatic gunfire and explosions that shook the reinforced walls of her apartment. Her emergency training kicked in immediately, and she grabbed the medical kit she kept beside her bed, knowing that in situations like this, injuries were inevitable and medical care would be critical. The hallway outside her apartment was controlled chaos. Security personnel moved with military precision, coordinating through headsets while ensuring that non-combatants were protected. One of them, a man she knew as Tanaka Masaki, was bleeding from a shoulder wound but still functional. "Ms. Williams," he said, spotting her with the medical kit. "Mr. Yamamoto wants you in the secure medical facility immediately." "How bad is it?" she asked, already assessing his injury as they moved toward the emergency elevator. "Flesh wound. Missed anything important. But we have 3 men down in the East Wing who need immediate attention." The medical facility was organized chaos when they arrived. 2 of Hiroshi's men were on examination tables, Dr. Tanaka working frantically to stabilize the more seriously injured. The 3rd man was conscious but bleeding heavily from a leg wound that would require surgery. Dr. Tanaka looked up as she entered, relief evident on his face. "Thank God you're here. I need another pair of skilled hands immediately." Zara didn't hesitate. She moved to the man with the leg wound, quickly assessing the damage while Dr. Tanaka continued working on the more critical case. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone or major arteries. Painful and dangerous from blood loss, but manageable with proper treatment. "You're going to be fine," she told her patient as she worked to control the bleeding. "What's your name?" "Sato," he replied through gritted teeth. "This is nothing compared to what we're giving them." She smiled despite the circumstances, impressed by his determination to maintain morale even while injured. The wound required careful cleaning and pressure bandaging, but her hands were steady and her movements efficient. This was what she'd trained for, what she was good at, and in the middle of a war zone, her medical skills were exactly what was needed. The gunfire outside had intensified, suggesting the conflict was far from over. But inside the medical facility, she and Dr. Tanaka created a bubble of healing, working together to ensure that Hiroshi's men would recover fully from their injuries. 40 minutes after the attack began, silence settled over the compound like a heavy blanket. The absence of gunfire was almost more unsettling than the violence had been, suggesting that one side or the other had achieved decisive victory. Kenji appeared in the medical facility doorway, his clothing torn and stained, but his expression grimly satisfied. "All clear," he reported. "Sasaki forces neutralized. Mr. Yamamoto wants to speak with you when you're finished here, Ms. Williams." "Is he hurt?" she asked immediately. "No injuries. But he wants to see you personally." She finished bandaging Sato's leg and left him in Dr. Tanaka's capable hands, following Kenji through corridors that showed evidence of the morning's violence. Bullet holes in walls, shattered windows, areas where blood had been hastily cleaned but stains remained visible. The aftermath of warfare was always sobering, but Zara found herself feeling pride rather than horror. These men had fought to protect each other, to protect her, to maintain the security that allowed good people to do good work. The violence was terrible, but its purpose was protection, and she could live with that moral complexity. She found Hiroshi in his study, standing at the windows that overlooked the compound's main courtyard. His clothing was disheveled, and there were stains on his shirt that she suspected were blood, but he appeared uninjured. His posture spoke of exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, moving to examine him for injuries. "No," he said, turning to face her. "But seeing you safe is the only thing that matters right now." His hands found her face, fingers tracing her cheekbones as if confirming she was real and unharmed. The touch was gentle, reverent, filled with emotion that went far beyond relief. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Not of losing the compound, not of losing my business or my position. I was terrified of losing you." But you didn't, she said. I'm fine. Everyone is going to recover. This time. But there will be other threats, other people who think hurting you will give them power over me. And every time that happens, I risk losing the most important thing in my world. The most important thing. You, Zara. You're the most important thing in my world. More important than my empire, my reputation, my legacy. You're what makes all of this worthwhile. His admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that transformed the entire nature of their relationship. This wasn't an employer speaking to an employee, or even a protector speaking to someone under his care. This was a man admitting that his heart belonged to someone completely. When I saw them trying to take you in that parking garage, he continued, his voice quiet but intense, I understood something that I've been avoiding acknowledging. I love you, Zara. Not because you saved my life, not because you're valuable to my organization, but because you've become essential to who I am. She felt her breath catch as the words settled into her consciousness. Love. Not protection, not possession, not even deep affection, but love in its most complete and vulnerable form. Hiroshi, she said, but he continued before she could respond. I know this complicates everything. I know you didn't sign up for my feelings when you agreed to work for me, but I need you to understand that when I say you belong to me, I'm not claiming ownership. I'm acknowledging that you own me completely. The vulnerability in his admission was staggering. This powerful, dangerous man was offering her his heart without conditions, without expectations, with nothing but hope that her feelings might mirror his own. You're mine, he said, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with adrenaline and smoke from the morning's battle. Not as my employee, but as my woman, my heart, my future. Everything I am, everything I've built, it all exists to ensure your happiness and safety. The possession declaration should have felt overwhelming, but delivered with such emotion, such obvious love, it felt like being claimed by someone who understood exactly what she was worth. And you're mine, she replied, her hands finding the lapels of his torn shirt, pulling him closer. Broken pieces and all. Your past, your darkness, your dangerous world. I choose all of it because I choose you. His control finally cracked. The careful restraint he'd maintained throughout their professional relationship dissolved as he pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was desperate, grateful, and infinitely tender. She kissed him back with months of suppressed emotion, acknowledging feelings she'd been afraid to name even to herself. This was more than gratitude, more than professional respect, more than attraction to his power and protection. This was love in its most complete form, acceptance of everything he was and everything their life together would require. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers as if he needed the physical connection to believe this was real. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both momentous and inevitable. I think I've loved you since that night in the penthouse when you could have let me walk away, but chose to protect me instead. Forever, he said, and it wasn't a question but a promise. Forever, she agreed. Outside, dawn light was filtering through the windows, illuminating the compound where his men were cleaning up the aftermath of violence that had been necessary to protect what they valued most. Inside, two people who'd found each other through crisis and built love through trust were finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. The world outside remained dangerous. There would be other threats, other people who underestimated the lengths Hiroshi Yamamoto would go to protect the woman he loved. But in this moment, wrapped in each other's arms, both of them understood that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. Zara had walked into his world by accident, but she was choosing to stay by design. Not for the security, not for the financial benefits, not even for the protection, but for the man who'd shown her that love could exist even in darkness, that healing could happen even in violence, that two broken people could become something stronger together than either could be alone. The cage she'd feared had become a sanctuary. The dangerous world she'd entered had become home. And the man she'd saved had saved her in return, not from poverty or danger, but from a life without love, without purpose, without the knowledge that she was valued beyond measure by someone who would move heaven and earth to ensure her happiness. This was what forever looked like. Not perfect, not safe, but real and deep and strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. 6 months after the attack that had finally brought them together, Zara Williams stood in the penthouse where it had all begun, looking out at the city lights that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The wrong delivery that had changed everything felt like a lifetime ago, though she could still remember the terror of finding a bleeding stranger and the split-second decision that had transformed both their lives completely. Tonight was different. Tonight, Hiroshi Yamamoto had asked her to meet him in the study where they'd shared so many evening conversations, where he'd told her about Yuki, where their professional relationship had slowly evolved into something deeper and more precious than either had expected. He was waiting for her beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, dressed in an elegant dark suit that made his sharp features even more striking. But tonight there was something different in his expression, a nervous energy that was unusual for someone whose control was legendary. "You look beautiful," he said as she entered, his voice carrying warmth that still sent pleasant shivers through her despite months of hearing it daily. She was wearing the deep blue dress he'd given her for her nursing school graduation ceremony, an event he'd attended despite the security concerns, sitting in the back row and applauding when her name was called. Seeing his pride in her accomplishment had meant more than the degree itself. "Thank you," she said, moving to stand beside him at the windows. "What's the occasion? You seemed mysterious when you asked me to meet you here tonight." "The occasion," he said, turning to face her fully, "is that I have something important to ask you. Something I should have asked months ago, but was afraid you weren't ready to hear." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made her heart skip several beats. When he opened it, the ring inside was breathtaking without being ostentatious. A perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "will you marry me? Not because of what I can provide, not because of the security or the resources, but because you love me enough to build a life together despite all the complications that entails." She stared at the ring, at the man offering it, at the future he was proposing. Marriage to Hiroshi Yamamoto would mean permanent integration into his world, formal acknowledgement of their partnership, legal protection that went beyond employment contracts or security arrangements. More than that, it would mean choosing love over safety, choosing complexity over simplicity, choosing a man whose hands were stained with violence, but whose heart was entirely devoted to her happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I'll marry you." His relief was visible as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the fit perfect because of course he'd ensured every detail was exactly right. The diamond felt substantial but not heavy, beautiful but not impractical, like everything else he'd brought into her life. "There's more," he said, leading her to sit in the chairs where they'd shared so many conversations. "Legal arrangements to ensure your independence and security regardless of what happens to me or my businesses. Medical partnership opportunities that will let you use your skills exactly as you've always dreamed." "What kind of partnerships?" "We're establishing a network of medical clinics in underserved communities, fully funded through legitimate business revenue. Free healthcare for people who can't afford insurance, trauma care for injuries that can't be explained to traditional authorities, addiction treatment that doesn't require police involvement. You would oversee the medical operations, hiring staff, establishing protocols, ensuring quality care." It was exactly what she dreamed of during nursing school, before financial reality had forced her to abandon those idealistic goals. Using medical skills to help people who needed care most, working outside traditional systems that often failed the most vulnerable populations. "You're giving me everything I wanted," she said, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. "I'm giving us a future where your compassion and my resources create something meaningful together, where the darkness of my world serves the light of your purpose." A month later, Maria Williams sat in the private garden of the Oncology Center's luxury wing, her color healthy and vibrant for the first time in 2 years. The experimental treatments had been more successful than anyone had dared hope, and her latest scans showed no trace of cancer remaining. Zara found her mother reading in the afternoon sunlight, looking like the vital, energetic woman she'd been before illness had stolen her strength and hope. "You look wonderful," Zara said, settling into the chair beside her mother's. "I feel wonderful. Dr. Chun says the treatments have been completely successful. Whatever this job of yours involves, I'm grateful you found it when you did." Zara had been dreading this conversation, knowing her mother deserved to understand exactly who had saved her life and what that meant for their family's future. There's something I need to tell you about Hiroshi, about his business, about what my job really involves. She explained carefully, honestly, about Hiroshi Yamamoto's world, his legitimate businesses, and his less conventional activities, the protection she lived under, and why it was necessary. Her mother listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never expressing judgment or disapproval. When Zara finished, Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering everything she'd learned. "This man loves you," she said finally. "Yes, very much. And you love him. More than I thought possible. And he's given us both our lives back. Me through medical care I never could have afforded. You through opportunities you'd given up hope of having. That's all true." Maria reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing gently. "Then I don't care what business he's in or what world he lives in. Love that generous, that protective, that transformative, is worth whatever complications come with it. You have my blessing, Mija." 2 weeks later, they were married in a private ceremony at the compound, surrounded by the people who had become their chosen family. Dr. Tanaka served as Hiroshi's best man, while Maria Williams walked her daughter down the aisle with tears of joy rather than grief. The ceremony was small but beautiful, conducted in the garden where Zara had spent so many quiet hours during her transition into Hiroshi's world. Kenji and the security team served as witnesses, their usually serious faces showing genuine happiness for their boss and the woman who had become essential to his well-being. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hiroshi's kiss was tender and reverent, acknowledgement that they had chosen each other not out of desperation or convenience, but out of love deep enough to last whatever challenges their future might hold. The reception was a revelation of another side of Hiroshi's organization. Men who were dangerous in business but gentle in celebration, who toasted their boss's happiness with genuine affection and welcomed Zara as family with complete sincerity. A year after their wedding, Zara Yamamoto stood in the first of their medical clinics, watching her nursing staff provide care to patients who had nowhere else to turn. The clinic served the community where she'd grown up, offering everything from basic primary care to trauma treatment that didn't require explanation or documentation. The work was exactly what she dreamed of during those long nights of delivery driving, using her medical skills to heal rather than just survive, making a difference in lives that traditional systems had failed or forgotten. Hiroshi found her there as the evening shift ended, reviewing patient charts and treatment protocols with the satisfaction of someone whose work aligned perfectly with their values. "Good day," he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Excellent day. We treated 47 patients, including 3 who needed surgical intervention that would have cost them thousands at traditional hospitals. Dr. Martinez says our trauma protocols are becoming a model for other community clinics." His pride in her accomplishments was evident in his voice. "You've built something extraordinary here. We've built something extraordinary. Your resources, my medical knowledge, our shared commitment to helping people who need it most." It was true. Their marriage had become a partnership that extended far beyond personal happiness into meaningful work that honored both his sister's memory and Zara's healing instincts. As they drove home through the city where they'd first met, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them from that crisis-filled night to this peaceful evening. She'd walked into his penthouse by accident, carrying food meant for someone else, and found a bleeding stranger whose world was completely foreign to her own. Now she was Mrs. Yamamoto, co-director of a medical network that served thousands of patients annually, secure in love that had proven strong enough to weather violence, complex enough to honor both their histories, and generous enough to create healing for others. The wrong delivery had become the right life. The dangerous stranger had become her beloved husband. The cage she'd feared had become the foundation for everything she'd ever wanted to accomplish. That night, as they sat together in the penthouse study where so much of their relationship had developed, Hiroshi treated a small cut on his hand from a minor accident with office equipment. Zara cleaned and bandaged the wound with the same careful attention she'd given his knife injury that first night, but now her touch carried love rather than professional duty. "You're very good at this," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken during that first crisis. "I had excellent training," she replied, "and plenty of practice on difficult patients." difficult patience. The most challenging case I've ever handled. Stubborn, dangerous, completely unwilling to follow medical advice until he found the right motivation. And what was the right motivation? Love, she said simply. Love was always the right motivation. As she finished securing the small bandage, Hiroshi caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss against her palm. "Thank you," he said, and she understood he was thanking her for more than wound care. For saving his life that first night, for choosing to stay when staying was dangerous, for building a future together that honored both their dreams and their realities. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm of ambition and struggle, hope and despair, people searching for connection in a world that often seemed determined to keep them isolated. But inside their sanctuary, two people who had found each other through crisis and chosen each other through love continued the quiet work of healing, both themselves and the world they decided to make better together. The wrong delivery had led to the right life, and every day proved that some accidents were actually destiny in disguise.